Thank you so much for joining in with us this morning here at West. It's an exciting day as we end our message series called Good Vibes Around the Four Agreements. If you are new here to West, we would love to hear from you. If you're worshiping with us this morning on Sunday, or if you're watching it or listening via podcast throughout the week, text the word welcome to the number that you see on the screen, 704-343-8955. Let us know that you're here. We have a gift we'd love to share with you, and then you can opt in for whatever communication you would like to receive from us. This morning we are going to be talking about all the four agreements, how they come together, and how they can make our lives better. So I think you're going to walk away with some powerful thoughts that you are going to learn from other fellow Westies this morning. So stay tuned.
I got my windows down and my blinders on. Radio set to my favorite song. All green lights on the road I'm on, man, there ain't no doubt. I'm getting them good vibes. I'm living this good life. I'm breathing on God's time, and I ain't gonna waste one breath. I'm soaking it all up. I got me a full cup, and there ain't nothing gonna spill it, nothing gonna kill it. Waving them words goodbye. I'm feeling them good vibes.
So we are finishing up our message series on the four agreements, and we are relating these agreements to us and our faith and the teachings of Jesus and how we're called to love each other and love God and love ourselves. And so this book that we've been reading is also the foundation of what we're going to be teaching in just a few weeks as we travel to Kigumba, Uganda, and Nairobi, Kenya, and do a Mind, Body, Spirit conference with both of those churches. And we're really excited about that. And we're excited to be exploring some of the same universal truths that are relatable to us and our lives, and how we're called to live our lives in the ways and in the footsteps of Jesus, loving God, loving ourselves, and loving one another. Today I have the panel with us again. You guys all shared with us how much you loved that message a few weeks ago, and so we're going to end this message series with our panel as well. We have questions for them that they're going to take turns answering, and I really feel like you're going to find yourself in their answers today. It is a powerful way of drawing a close to this message series that we're going to be talking about, the four different agreements. So the first agreement is to be impeccable with your word. And before we dive into that, I'd invite our panelists to introduce themselves to you, and then we'll get started.
I'm Barry Brown.
I'm Jason Thiel.
I'm Chris Hampton.
And I'm Lexi Hernandez.
And so now, if you all wouldn't mind diving into that question, what does being impeccable with your word mean to you? And let's not all go.
I was waiting for Chris.
Chris, you go first.
I'll go first. I don't know. To me, impeccable with your word really kind of goes along this idea of we are very quick to when we experience things, when we go through things, we're quick to jump to judgment. We're quick to speak a lot of times, especially when we're mad, especially when we find our insecurities are bubbling up inside of us. We are quick to pass judgment. And to me, to be impeccable with your word is to take a step back, to pause, to reflect on yourself, to not let your ego speak, but to let whatever is flowing through you speak. Let the Word of God speak through you. The Holy Spirit, let Him speak through you at times. And so I don't know. I think in my view, impeccable with your word is just taking a step back, pausing, and then speaking. And in a lot of those cases, a lot of good can come from taking a pause.
Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, I would just say this. The impeccable with your word to me is like Chris said, is just being mindful. Being more aware on what you're choosing your words. My interaction with my son this past few weeks, I've been trying. My youngest, just being careful how I communicate with him, because I know that he's going through. He's different stage in his life, just like I am. But me communicating on his level, and I need to know what he needs from me. And so sometimes not asking those things get you into trouble, and making sure you're careful. Just being careful.
Yeah.
So when we listened to the message and we were talking, Deborah and I were talking about this, I summed it up very simply as think before you speak. And I said that to her, and she quoted this author, leadership management seminar person named Brene Brown that Microsoft used across the company for leadership training. And the phrase she used is, be clear to be kind. And I thought, wow, that's even better than think before you speak. So,
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, to me, it means to say what you mean and mean what you say. So I'm huge on backing up what you say. If you say you're going to do something, I believe you. I believe that it'll get done. If you say you're going to be somewhere at a certain time, I believe that that's when I'll see you at that location. So I just think that you should not say anything you don't mean, because words can be taken out of context very easily, and to just follow through with your word, because words are extremely important.
Yeah, the power of the spoken word. And I think it's really important to remember that we all have this inner self that is our ego, and our ego acts out of our not best self often. And so I love how, Chris, you shared that, when we're feeling threatened or insecure, or anytime we have a negative experience going on within us, sometimes before we even can figure it out, our mouths start moving. And so it's interesting to me that you all have alluded to the fact or said that we need to stop, pause, take a step back, and think through that. Brene Brown is just, she's phenomenal, and I encourage you, Google her. She has great TED Talks. She's just a leading person of faith, but she's a business leader, a psychologist or psychiatrist or something, and she's just...
Yeah, and her big focus is on vulnerability and,
Yeah.
and showing yourself and being vulnerable in the moment and allowing that vulnerability to turn you into your best self, which goes into the whole topic of what you were just talking about with the whole the ego or the false self, is like Thomas Merton or Richard Rohr would say, the false self, and giving in to or allowing the authentic self or the true self to emerge.
And we're so frightened to do that because, we don't want to be hurt. We don't want to be judged. And so the power of this Four Agreements book that really led me to it to start with was that, we talk a lot at West about loving one another, that Jesus teaches us to love one another, but we're also called to love ourselves. And one of the first places that we're often unkind is toward ourself. We beat ourselves up more than we perhaps are even judgmental about others. So the next question, Barry and Chris, what negative words do people use toward themselves, and how do you feel like those negative words affect how they can love themselves?
I think the more common negative words that even as children we learn to use, and then as adults we do the same thing. We're negative about either our intellect or our body shape or our hairstyle or whatever, and that's important to someone, or they think it's important to someone else, and using those words, I'm stupid or ignorant or idiot or fat or anything like that, once they've been said, you start to believe it and act out on it, and that's how they're negative. That's how it prevents us from feeling any self-love, because we're disconnected from that.
Yeah, I like what you said, Andrea, just a second ago with we're often, I'll paraphrase, but we're often our own worst enemy. The words that we use to ourselves are often way worse than anything we would say to our friends, to our family, to even a stranger. My therapist actually reminds me a lot of times to say, Chris, how would you treat a friend right now? Let's go to the other side of the street and look at how you would treat a friend right now, how you would treat even a random stranger. Would you be saying the things that you're saying to yourself to other people? And often the answer is no. And it often goes around words like Barry mentioned with intellect or about ourselves. And then we have this automatic thought process that constantly flows in our head, that all the time, the minute we are triggered, the minute something happens, whether it's an emotion or a thought or something happens in the world, regardless of whether you know it or not, you're immediately reacting. And if you train yourself, and you do that from growing up from not explicitly, I mean, oftentimes it just is in the background, you're training yourself to constantly be negative about yourself. I'm not quite good enough. I can't do this. I weigh too much for this. I'm this or that. And the challenge we have is to challenge those thoughts, to go back to being the impeccable on our word in a way, not just outspoken for everybody else, but to be impeccable on our word to ourselves, to be kind to ourselves, to love ourselves. Importantly, to go off of this Brene Brown train that we've hopped on, to be vulnerable to ourselves and to let that vulnerability shine, because you're not perfect. None of us are perfect, and in the imperfection is where we find happiness.
Right. And it's important to be aware of all this so that we can change our words toward ourselves and offer ourselves that love. I mean, it's part of the calling and the teachings of Jesus. Love God and love your neighbor, but there's an end part to that statement. And what is it? It's to love our neighbor as ourselves. And it's hard to love ourselves because we are conditioned to experience what we are mirrored. And as we grow up, we have this mirroring of other people that are reflecting things back on us. And we have to remember, which is an agreement in a few minutes we're going to talk about, everybody's acting out of their own stuff.
Yeah.
And so the not taking it personal and all that kind of stuff, you know, everybody's dealing with their own stuff, and then they cast that on us, and it just becomes this spiral. So I think, Chris, your word, triggers, you know, we do all have triggers that we may not even be aware of, but it makes us experience that feeling of uncertainty and vulnerability, and it's how we act in those moments with our words that really can change and make a difference in our whole being. Giving ourselves permission to wrestle, you know, and struggle with things that we need to heal from, and being kind to ourselves with our words is so important. Lexi and Jason, have you ever experienced the negative impact of another person's words? Jason, you're laughing.
Well,
you are supposed to go second, but I really want to go with you first.
Where do I start? I mean, I grew up in a house where there was a lot of negative, you know, and that's where, you know, I've been in therapy. I think, Andrea, you know this, for about 1.5 years now. And, you know, part of that healing process is identifying who I am at my core, and finding out what that is. And then you heal all that other stuff once you figure out who you are today. And so, like, all those things I don't really look at now, although I can look at them and go, yeah, that was part of my past, but that's not who I am. And it's certainly not who God created me to be. And that's for sure. And so that's really, I've experienced it, but like trying now to manage it in the moment, you know, just being aware, hey, that didn't feel very good what that man just said to me, you know? And then when you step away, sometimes you get this like thought in your head, well, what if I had said this, or how would I handle myself differently? Just being aware of those things for me is power. Because in the moment I can say, that's valid. No, that's not. That's just somebody's stuff, you know? That's not my stuff. So it's really where I'm at with the whole thing about negative self-talk, this negative self-image in your head. You know, I just do this little thing. I'll share it with y'all. I had a friend share it with me. It was from a therapist. It's like, I don't have time for that today.
Oh, wow.
Okay. I am strong. I am happy. I'm loving. Tell yourself whatever you want, but like, I just don't have time for that particular notion, you know?
Yeah.
whatever it might be, you know.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
And I love the vulnerability that you all bring to this. I just think it's so powerful that you share so openly.
So first, I would love to meet someone who hasn't ever been affected
Yeah.
by somebody else's words. I need some
me
secrets.
too, right?
I need their tips and tricks. I'm better about it now. I'll be 25 in July this summer. I'm working on it, and I do feel like I'm much better now than I used to be. And Barry, like you mentioned earlier, as a child, those things can be detrimental. And I can remember specifically in 6th grade, right down the road at Lakeshore Middle School, I was in the middle of changing classes, and this kid came up to me, and I didn't like him for whatever reason, and that just irritated him to no end. And he says, well, you need Proactive, and which is the acne face wash that was popular like a couple of years ago. And I've always had problematic skin, so even sometimes now I'll wake up and I'll see I've got some breakouts on my face, and I think of that darn little boy in the hallway of 6th grade. And I'm like, dang, his words are still affecting me to this day. And it's just, I feel like now I'm much better about it, but I do have those moments and things growing up that have really stuck with me where my feelings were just really hurt by something that people said.
And if we don't develop that awareness, like you talk about, you know, that negative self-talk just continues and continues. So the main point of this is to just really be aware of what negative words still feed that false self that we have going on in our lives. The second agreement is to not take anything personally. And that's so hard to do. So I would like to ask all of you, when do you find that you take things personally?
That's very easy for me. I know right off the bat, if you are somehow triggering one of my insecurities, I will take it personally in a heartbeat, every single time. Even though I know, like Jay said, that it reflects more on the person speaking to me, I will take it personally if I have an insecurity attached to whatever the conversation is around.
Yeah, I've never really thought about if it attaches to my insecurities, but I'm sure it does. And if that's the case, then I've got a lot, because I take everything personally all the time. So yeah, if Lindsay was here, she would be laughing in the corner because she knows that I take everything personally. Everything's about, if someone writes an email to me and I read it the wrong way, that it's personal. That person is mad at me, or you know, my boss is mad, I'm going to get fired. And it was like he said, "Thank you" with a period instead of an exclamation point. So I take pretty much everything personally.
Yeah.
So yes.
You know, taking things personally, I try not to do that so much anymore. But it's hard not to, you know, especially if somebody's like attacking your character or trying to manipulate. I think, you know, you always try to make sure that what the person is saying is there truth to it, you know. So for me, do I think I take things personally on many different levels, but I try not to let it. I know I'm a sensitive person, right? I'm going to admit that now, right? So if I'm that sensitive, you know, what am I using that sensitivity for? Am I going to put it in energy into something, somebody is telling me something negative about myself, or am I going to use it to be positive in somebody else's life? I think it's important for me to do that for my own sanity,
Right.
Yeah.
you know. So
I generally take something personal if the person makes it personal. Or they call your name, and it's very clear they're attacking me or my thought or whatever. Then in some way they've made it personal. My real flaw is bad drivers. Every time somebody makes a mistake driving, I think they're doing it to try to kill me. Yeah. And I'm not, I mean, I'm smiling, but I'm not. If you were in the car with me, you would know. You would hear lots and lots of nice words.
What do you think, Jason and Lexi, what do you think drives our action to put more value in the opinions of other people than opinions that we perhaps have?
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
That was a lot.
So we have opinions of ourselves, right? And then we have opinions that other people share about us or of us. And so often in life, when we're taking things personally, we put more value and more stock into other people's opinions of ourselves than we put into our own self-opinion, especially if it's negative, right? Like, if I make a decision around, let's say, the food truck, we've wrestled with our involvement in that for years. And we knew that in order for that ministry to move forward, it needed to check some boxes. And it just wasn't checking those boxes. And we, as leadership, as missions folks, made very intentional decisions about our withdrawal from that. And I know that, I don't do a lot of things right. I make mistakes, but we did do that right. But then other people's opinions about what I did with that, that's what I clung to. Even though I knew we did it together, I wasn't acting alone. All those right leadership and spiritual things, we were intentional about. But because a few people that didn't even know all that, and not West people at all, but thought poorly of me, that's what kept me up at night. So that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I would say, unless I'm 100% confident in my self-opinion, if there's even the slightest bit of doubt coming from myself, then I will cling to the negative that person said. So if I allow any room for doubt in my opinion, what that person said is only going to confirm my doubt and amplify my doubt. So I think unless I'm totally 100% confident, then I am leaving room for others' opinions to mean more than my own opinion.
Chris and Barry, if people disagree with a decision you make, do you take that personally?
I do, and I think the reason is because if someone disagrees with me, in my head, that instantly tells me that means I have the potential to be wrong, and if I'm wrong, then that means there's something wrong with me because my thought process is wrong. I think that's my ego, right? That just goes right back to my ego, to my false self, to this idea that if someone disagrees with me, then I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, I need to be the center of attention. I need to be the one who knows everything. Growing up, the one thing I always considered myself, and I'm gonna sound a little arrogant here, but I always considered myself pretty smart, pretty intelligent, especially in my household. And my brothers loved that because they always like, well, we're not stupid. And I said, I didn't say that. I'm just smarter than you. And so. To me, that's a challenge. If someone disagrees with me, then that gives me the potential to be wrong, which then questions my own thought, my doubt, like you mentioned, of whether I really am intelligent, whether I really am smart. If I'm not intelligent or smart, that's what I hold on to as my one thing that I have in this world that I feel like I have. And if I don't have that, then who am I, or what do I have? And so you can see where that thought process starts building and piling up with all these insecurities. And so that was way more than the question, but that, yes.
Well, thank you.
So my answer would be different even a year ago, and especially 5 or 10 years ago. But generally, 90% of the time, if someone disagrees with me, it doesn't affect me at all.
Good.
If they're disagreeable about it, then I begin to take that personally. And as an example, a couple of years ago, we were at dinner on a road trip, and a coworker and I had a discussion about 2 different team spectator sports. And I was giving my opinion about why the one I preferred was better, and he was giving his. And so I guess I ended up as the rebuttal witness or whatever, and he started getting all just fidgety and everything, and he says, well, then you're right and I'm wrong. And I said, well, no, we're both right because it's just an opinion.
Yeah.
Right.
And at that point, he started yelling at me. I started taking that personally.
Yeah. Yeah. What advice do you have on not taking things personally, Barry?
As best you can, or as best I can, I'll make it personal, is if you don't understand, or if you don't know the person, or you don't understand what they're saying, try to step back. This goes back to the impeccable word, and ask, well, what do you mean? And also try to, if you can, put yourself in the other person's shoes. What's happened to them? How's their day been? What's going on? Depends on who it is and how well you know them and that kind of thing. But to not take it personally is you just have to step back.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing as think before you speak.
Yeah. Lexi, you and I talk about the fact that we both overthink, and I am a thinker. It drives Tom crazy. He is a scientist by nature, and so he's like a biology and a physics major. So his brain thinks one way, and my brain thinks a very, very different way. And he's like, do you just like think all the time? Like, I've never met anyone that thinks so much. Like, is that all you do? I'm like, well, it is what I do for a living. And he's like, but you think all the time and overthink.
Yeah.
And so I think that, see, there you go. I think that's where we get into trouble sometimes when we start taking things personally. We start overthinking and we start attributing thoughts and beliefs and opinions to other people that may not even be there, because we are saying our negative self-talk to us and then projecting it onto other people, and that goes back to that, taking everything personally. And Barry just talked about this, that we need to, or that the way that you work through this is by trying to think about where are they coming from. So Lexi, I wanted you to elaborate with us on that. What do you do to understand when you're in a situation? Because I've seen you do this, where someone is coming from, which might be causing them to negatively interact with you in a certain way. What do you do with that?
I'm better at it some days than others. Some days, first I have to calm myself down before I burst into tears and just act crazy out of that. But I have gotten to a place where, although my initial reaction still might be, oh my goodness, they hate me or they are really displeased with me, I can still at some point get myself to where I can say, okay, I'm calm now. Maybe we need to talk about this. Maybe I should tell them I'm feeling this way. Or maybe I do know that they've had a bad day. Or I know that they're going through something at home. So it is a lot about handling my own reaction and then trying to figure out where that person's coming from for whatever reason that it might be in that minute. Because I know for me, it changes. It could be I've had a bad day, or the next week it could be, I don't know what else it could be, but there are many, many reasons, and they change very quickly and frequently.
Well, and you have given point to what leads us into the third agreement, which is to not make assumptions. But the way that we get to that is by asking questions. And you shared that just now in your answer. Like, when we learn not to take things personally, we start looking at their lives. Like, what are they going through? Did they maybe have a bad day? Are they tired? Are they being impacted by something bigger that we don't even know about that would cause them to say or act or behave towards us in this particular way? And if we will learn to ask questions, I think we will find that all of our relationships, both with others and ourselves, are better. You know, you don't want to ask 2 billion questions, but asking questions is a really good way to learn not to take things personally, to be impeccable with our word, and not to make assumptions, which is the third agreement. So I'd like for you all to take turns and speak to what you think an assumption is, and how do assumptions hurt you and others, or either or. So what's an assumption, and how is it harmful?
An assumption for me is actually a defense mechanism, I think. Because again, acting out of insecurities, trying to protect myself, I try to get ahead of everyone else in our thought processes. So I'm assuming something almost in a way to protect myself. And normally my assumptions are wrong. So then it backfires and can become very harmful because, one, I don't know what people are thinking or what their intentions are. So assuming is going to be harmful in that way. But two, it's just bad for me to try to get ahead of the game instead of being in the moment. I feel like with my overthinking, I just try to stay 10 steps ahead of myself, and that's never going to work out. So,
Thanks.
Yeah, I think I don't really have an addition to what an assumption is. I think Lexi said it great. You know, it's when we're assuming something about something or someone before we know or have spoken to that person or something like that. I think it's really harmful, though, because in a lot of ways, making assumptions can cause us not to get the full effect of that relationship. So if I make an assumption about a certain person, I may not talk to them or may not go up to them. I'm thinking back to like high school. If I assumed this person was a certain way, I may not have talked to them or something like that. Or I assume they're going to all judge me in this group, so I'm not going to speak as much. You know, there's a lot of ways that we cannot get the full effect when we assume, and we do it so often to build because of those barriers that we build up on ourselves.
Absolutely. To protect ourselves.
Yeah.
I think we make assumptions out of that false self to try to protect ourselves from things that could hurt us.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I think I've done it more in my past than I do now currently. I try not to make any assumptions because I think we all come from a place of hurt and pain, no matter who you are. And so, you know, I've been through a lot in my life, and I know everybody else has. So why am I going to assume that, you know, the reason why they're acting that way or something is because I used to do this all the time. I would just, my mind would race and I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, oh, that's why they're doing that. And then I would walk away because it was nice and clean for me. It was a protection it was a brain mechanism, you know, protecting myself from being hurt or being attacked, you know, like keep everybody here. You know, I'm going to assume this about you so I don't really have to get to know you instead of asking the questions that I need to know or to get to the bottom of who that person is, or asking why. Why would you say that? You know, that's an interesting question to ask people.
Yeah,
you know?
That's a great question.
Like, put it back on them. You know, if something strikes you as attacking, you know, well, what would drive you to say that to me? You know, please explain yourself. I mean, it's a legitimate question to ask, I think, and a lot of people don't because we think it's a combative question, or, you know, we don't want to have confrontation, so I'm going to assume that you're okay with it, but that person might not be okay with it too, you know? And so, I don't know.
Yeah, I think, no, that's exactly right. And I mean, just in my own life and relationships and experiences, I have found recently that those closest to me have figured me out a little. And so when I'll say something that perhaps might not be the best or most affirming thing, they'll say, so what would make you say that right now? And I'm like, oh dear. You know, because then I have to be vulnerable and I have to, and because what's making me say those things is my inner pain and my fear of being hurt or abandoned or lied to or whatever. And so then I have to admit, you know what, actually right now I'm hurting. And I hate that. I hate not having all my stuff together
Yeah.
and needing to admit this is hard for me. I don't like that. So
Yeah.
that is a brilliant question. It shuts me up almost every time. So if you ever want to shut me up, just say, "What would
I don't
make
wanna
you
shut you
think
up."
that or say that?" So
And you know, sorry, Barry, not to cut you off, but
okay.
that reminds me of the impeccable word. If you can't answer that question, then you should have never said it.
well, that would be their point, I
Yeah.
think.
I'm late, fashionably late to the
That would
party.
be the, I think, but I mean, no, really, like when they say that to me, I know that I've pushed too far
Yeah.
with my words, and my words have been unkind, even if I didn't mean them to be. And it goes like, recently I was in a conversation, and they said, "Are you ever going to assume the good?" And I was like, "Well, that's a interesting question." And they're like, "Aren't you doing a message series around the impeccable word and assuming?" And they said, "You always assume the bad. You always assume that
I used to do
something is going to hurt
I used to
you."
do it all the
And
time.
I'm like,
I'm not alone.
"I do. Thank you for pointing that out. And clearly I need to continue therapy." So, Barry.
I'll try to be brief and simple again. I think the context of this is assumptions in human interactions, whether that be verbal or behavior. The number is all over the place, but somewhere around 90% supposedly of communication is nonverbal.
Oh, wow.
So when we're interacting with other folks, we need to be aware of, do they understand me? Do they understand what I'm conveying? And do I understand what they're conveying? Because we're both assuming, what I'm saying right now, I'm assuming you're all understanding it. And I look at Chris and I'm not sure. But
I mean, nod my
that
head
was a
no.
joke. But that's the point, is that
Right.
the assumption is we're clearly communicating both directions. And that's a given. So
And I think just that importance of seeking clarity to make sure that we are communicating and being understood and being clear. So the fourth agreement is to always do your best. Chris and Barry, do you think that doing your best means the same thing for all people?
No, I don't think so. And I think it kind of goes back to the idea actually that we were just talking about recently, which is kind of the idea around when someone disagrees with you or says something negative, you try to look at it from their perspective. You know, everybody has their own different perspective. Everybody's going through their own stuff. Everybody has their own new day. And I think everybody's best is going to vary day to day. I think it's going to change because everybody has a new lease on life. Every morning when you wake up, you know, you have that opportunity to kind of restart, reset, and that looks different for a lot of people. So for someone, it might be going into work and completing a full day's work and doing a great job. For someone else, it might be just getting out of bed that day because they've been struggling with depression recently or anxiety or whatever. And maybe just getting out of bed is doing their best that day. And that means a lot and says a lot. And so you can't look at other people and base your best based on their best. You have to kind of base it and compare it on what you're going through and what you think is best for that moment.
I really don't think I can add anything to what Chris said.
Yeah.
I think that's
Really beautiful.
exactly. Agree.
And that gives wisdom to the point that our best may look different on different days, depending on where we are in our journeys. You know, there are times that everything seems to be flowing and fitting together, and our stressors in life are less than. So that day, we may be able to accomplish everything we want to accomplish. And then there may be other times and seasons in our lives where we have a lot of extraneous things that are happening that cause us to not be able to be where we were. And I think giving ourselves permission to be our best each day and not holding ourselves to some kind of like unrealistic perfectionist standard. That's just, we need to give ourselves grace.
Right.
God gives us that grace. We need to give ourselves that grace.
Yeah.
Barry, what do you think about the concept of perfectionism versus doing one's best?
Well, I don't remember my color, but I was one of those perfectionist colors. So I don't want to give the honest answer, but no, I'm kidding. We used to have a saying in project management that perfection is the enemy of the good. And
Yeah.
so perfectionism, no human is perfect. Or there was one human that was perfect. Trying to achieve perfection in anything you do is not going to, it's not possible. And other than maybe gymnastics where they get a 10 or something like that, but
And even that's subjective.
and that's subjective. So if you're striving for perfection, you're never going to achieve it. So if it's unachievable, it's a goal you're going to fail at, and that's going to make you feel bad. So
Yeah.
admit what your goals are that they're attainable, and then you won't feel bad when you do attain them.
Yeah.
So
Cool. So as we close today, I would love for you to share with our viewers, listeners, which of the 4 agreements do you personally want to focus on to make your life more like the life that we've been created by God to live, which is loving God, loving ourselves, and loving one another? And I'd like for us to end with that today.
Can you read the 4 again? I know
Yeah.
we've been talking about it.
No,
Now my
for
mind
sure.
just slipped.
So the first one is to be impeccable with your word and to be kind with our words, not just towards others, but towards ourselves. The second one is to not take things personally. The third is to not make assumptions and to ask questions. And the fourth is to always do our best, but understand that our best does not have to equal perfection. It merely is giving our best.
Yeah, I think if I had to just choose one of them, because I really need to work on all 4 of them, but really one would be the assumptions. I struggle a lot with. I'm a very black and white person, and so I very much place people into boxes and assume things out of conversations, and assume things about people I don't know and people I do know and people that talk to me. I make a lot of assumptions, and most of the time those assumptions are wrong, because when I get to know that person, none of those things were true most of the time that I was thinking of. And then the flip side to that is a lot of times I walk into a room and I have a lot of social anxiety, and so I think that everybody's thinking about me. And some of the best advice I ever received was, Chris, it's not about you. More than likely, none of those people are even thinking about you. And while that sounds terrible, it's actually great advice, because it helps when you walk into that room and you're thinking, okay, this person's thinking I need to dress better. This person's thinking I need to do this. And the reality is they're probably not thinking that. They're probably thinking the exact same things you're thinking, but about themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
And
That's great advice.
yeah, absolutely.
That's great
I
advice.
assumed that Chris would take assumptions because that was my answer too.
And y'all are twins of different generations.
So, but the thing that about assumptions that we didn't cover when we talked about it is our biases. That when we meet someone new or we see someone and they remind us of someone from our past,
Yeah.
and we initially have some instinctive dislike or like for them, and we don't know anything about them. And other biases, implicit biases and those kinds of things affect everything we do as far as interacting with people, especially people that we're just getting to know. The more you know someone, the more you can, to your point, Andrea, people that know you understand you and know what you mean sometimes if you say something that's not clear,
Right.
or same thing for me. So, but that was a good answer, Chris.
I assumed you would say that. I think
I would say mine is assumptions as well. Anybody who knows me knows that I will ask you a million questions. I love to get to know people, but it's almost like I've got a little switch in my brain. If I need to ask a question that's going to expose an insecurity of mine, I'm probably not going to ask it. But I'll ask you, well, what's your childhood trauma? What are you dealing with? Like, I love hearing about everybody else's, but my insecurities will just make me assume. And I don't know if this is a common thing, but I assume based on past experiences. So it's almost like I go into a situation hoping that I can place it in a little box like something I've already experienced, just so there are no surprises for me, just to protect myself. So assuming is the one that I definitely need to be working on.
Well, and you're right. That is done by a lot of people. So you're not alone there, because, and that's evolutionary and biological too, because before we would have to survive, and so we had to teach ourselves how to survive. So when we walked out there and our friend got killed by the tiger, we knew not to go towards the tiger. Now, as we progress, we haven't necessarily evolved past that evolutionary brain. We still have those kind of thought processes. So when something negative happens, we play, even if it's something small in the grand scheme of things. We're not putting ourselves out in front of a lion, but whenever we whenever we do have something negative, it goes into our brain. Okay, don't do that again. Even though we know deep down that that's not going to kill us.
Yeah.
Our brain still thinks that way. It's designed that way.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you for that, because that makes me feel better.
You're not
I don't
alone.
like that other people have to go through
know,
that,
right,
but
right.
We all do.
Jay, what about you?
I think the thing I'm trying to focus on, I think, is being impeccable with my word. I think that's really one that so much damage can be done when you use words that aren't in line. You know, if your heart rate's up, if you're upset, you can't take those things back. You know, once they're out, they're out.
Right.
And I think that, you know, my mom always used to tell me, Jay, because she knew I had a temper, she'd say, count to 10 before you say or do anything. And so I try to do that too.
I think my parents told me that too. Now that you mention that, I'm not sure I'm at the 10.
Yeah.
But
Pearl Jam lyric that says, some words when spoken can't be taken back.
and
Yeah.
that, you know
That is
what?
true.
That is absolutely true. Once they are out there, they just can't be taken back. I mean, the wounds can heal, but the wound is still there. So for me, it's to not take things personally. I think the world is like out to get me. I think like, you know, everybody thinks I'm lesser than. And so I've got to get past that. I've got to stop thinking it's all about me. But I'm working on it. So thank you for joining with us today. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, you do give us the power of our words. And we need to be mindful not only of how we use our words with one another, but how we use them with ourselves. We need to love ourselves just as you love us. And perhaps sometimes that's the hardest thing to do, because the grace that we extend to others is vast and big. And we are, as we've said here today, our own worst critic. So God, help us be kind to one another and to ourselves, and help us see the ways that you love us so that we can embrace that love and then carry it into our world. Thank you for loving us so deeply and so purely. And we offer ourselves to you in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
I want to thank all of our panelists for being with us today. It requires great vulnerability to share their personal life stories with you. And on behalf of the people of West and beyond, I'm grateful that you chose to be vulnerable with us. I think we all can learn a lot from each other, and it is about the power of community and being together. None of us are called to go this journey alone. And so with that, I invite you next Sunday to come to Lake Norman High School parking lot. We're going to be doing some things together in the parking lot, some missional things that will make other people's lives better. Some things around the Back to School Bash around our trip to Uganda and Kenya, and some other mission projects. And it's a great way for us to see each other again in person before we open back up in just a few more weeks. So I hope you will join with us next Sunday as we go now and be impeccable with our word, as we don't make assumptions and don't take things personally, and always do our best. May we go in peace. Amen.